The phone on my kitchen counter hasn't stopped ringing for 3 hours. It's the corporate attorney for the trucking company I spent 35 years building. He's not calling to threaten me anymore, he's calling to beg. But I'm not answering. I'm just watching the steam rise from my coffee, letting it ring. It started exactly 90 days ago in a cold, glass-walled conference room. The man sitting across from me wasn't just a CEO, he was my son. Alongside his wife, they slid a piece of paper toward me. Forced resignation, it read. They called me obsolete. They said my experience was just a legacy cost weighing down their bottom line. My son couldn't even look me in the eye when he handed me the pen. They thought my silence was defeat. They thought my signature on that dotted line was a surrender. They were wrong. What they didn't know, what they were too arrogant to check, was that my signature didn't just end my employment. It started a countdown. A legal time bomb buried deep in federal paperwork that only I knew about. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or treated like you're invisible because of your age, you need to hear this story. This isn't just about a lawsuit, it's about how I let my own son destroy his empire by simply giving him exactly what he asked for. They wanted me gone. Now they're about to find out exactly how much I was actually worth. My name is John Reynolds, and for 35 years I was the unseen engine behind one of the largest logistics fleets in the Midwest. I am 64 years old, a man who believes that a handshake is a contract, and that safety is written in blood, not binary code. Before the lawyers started calling and the empire started crumbling, I was simply a father who wanted to leave a legacy for his son, but I never imagined that the legacy would have to be reclaimed from the ashes of his betrayal. The phone rang at 2:14 a.m., shattering the silence of my bedroom. It was a sound I had been conditioned to answer for 3.5 decades. Most men my age were retired, sleeping soundly next to their wives, but my wife Martha had passed 5 years ago, and the only thing sharing my bed these days was a stack of industry journals and the ghost of the company I built. I fumbled for the receiver in the dark, my heart rate barely spiking. At this hour, a call meant only one thing: a driver was in trouble. "John, it's Miller." The voice on the other end cracked tight with panic. "I'm at the way station on I-40 just outside of Memphis. They've got me pulled around back. The DOT officer is talking about red tagging the rig. He says the electronic logbook isn't syncing with the new GPS module the IT guys installed last week." I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, my mind instantly shifting into gear. A red tag meant the truck was out of service. That meant the load of medical supplies in the back would miss its delivery window at the hospital in Little Rock. That meant a penalty fee of $10,000 and a black mark on our safety score. But worse than the money, it meant we had failed a promise. "Put the officer on Miller," I said, my voice gravelly but calm. "He's not in a listening mood, boss. He's writing the citation now." "Put him on," I repeated, swinging my legs out of bed and walking to the window. I looked out at the dark driveway where my own pickup truck sat reliable and sturdy. "Tell him it's John Reynolds." There was a muffled exchange, the sound of wind against the receiver, and then a skeptical, authoritative voice came on the line. "This is Officer Henderson, Tennessee, DOT. Who am I speaking to?" "Evening, Officer Henderson. This is John Reynolds, Safety Director for Reynolds Logistics. I believe we met at the safety conference in Nashville 4 years ago. We discussed the importance of brake chamber adjustments on the new Volvos." There was a pause. The silence stretched for 3 seconds, the difference between a citation and a warning. I stood there in the dark, holding my breath. This wasn't about technology. It wasn't about the glitchy software my son David had insisted on rolling out before it was ready. This was about reputation. It was about the fact that in 35 years I had never ordered a driver to run illegal, never falsified a log, and never put a dangerous truck on the road. My name was the currency that bought us grace in moments like this. "Reynolds." Henderson grunted the edge, leaving his voice. "I remember. You're the one who argued that the regulations were too lenient on tire tread depth." "That's me," I said. "Look, officer, my driver tells me the new telematic unit is ghosting. I have the hard copies of his logs right here on my server, time-stamped. He's legal. He's rested. The truck is safe. The computer is lying, but my driver isn't. If you let him roll, I will personally have that unit replaced by noon today, and I'll fax you the work order to prove it." Another pause. "You vouching for this rig, John?" "With my license," I said. "All right." Henderson sighed. "I'm noting a warning for equipment malfunction. Get it fixed. Tell Miller to get out of here before I change my mind." "Thank you, officer." Stay safe out there. I hung up. The crisis was averted. No fine, no late delivery, no stain on our record. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hand shaking slightly, not from fear but from the adrenaline. That was the job. It was invisible work. My son David saw the company as a series of spreadsheets and profit margins. He saw trucks as assets and drivers as liabilities. He didn't understand that the reason our insurance premiums were half the industry average wasn't because of his efficiency algorithms. It was because when a DIAT officer saw the name Reynolds on the side of a truck, they knew John Reynolds was watching the shop. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat in the kitchen until sunrise thinking about the meeting scheduled for 9:00 a.m. David had sent the invite 2 days ago, simply titled Strategic Realignment. I assumed we were finally going to discuss the insurance renewal. The premiums were due to be renegotiated, and I had prepared a 20-page report showing how our safety protocols saved us millions. I was proud of that report. I was proud of what we had built. I washed my face shaved and put on my best suit, the navy blue one I wore for important client meetings. I tied my tie with precision, looking at the gray-haired man in the mirror. I looked tired, yes, but I looked capable. I looked like a man who held the shield that protected the kingdom. I arrived at the office at 8:45 a.m. The building was a sleek glass structure that David had insisted we lease 3 years ago. "Image is everything, Dad," he had said. I preferred our old brick yard where I could smell the diesel and hear the mechanics swearing, but I had relented. I wanted David to feel like the CEO. I wanted him to shine. When I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere was wrong. The air conditioning was set too low, creating a sterile, bone-deep chill. David was sitting at the head of the table, but he wasn't looking at me. He was intently studying a tablet screen, his finger scrolling nervously. Beside him sat Elena, his wife, and our newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer. Elena was a sharp woman, intelligent and ambitious, but she viewed the trucking industry with a barely concealed disdain. She saw it as a dirty, archaic beast that needed to be tamed by technology. To her, I was the dinosaur in the tar pit. Sitting in the corner was Mike from HR, a man I had hired 10 years ago when he was out of work. Mike wouldn't meet my eyes either. He was staring at his notepad, looking like he wished he could dissolve into the carpet. "Morning," I said, setting my leather briefcase on the mahogany table. "I've got the figures for the insurance renewal. If we leverage the incident-free streak from last quarter, I think we can drop the premium by another 6%. "Sit down, John," Elena said. She didn't say Dad. In the office, she rarely did. Her voice was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. I pulled out the chair and sat. "Is something wrong? Did we lose the Amazon contract?" David finally looked up. His face was pale. He looked like a boy who had broken a neighbor's window and was waiting for the police. "No, Dad, the contracts are fine. Better than fine, actually. We're pivoting." "Pivoting?" I repeated the buzzword, tasting the artificiality of it. "We've been reviewing the operational expenditures," Elena interjected, taking control of the meeting. She slid a thick dossier across the table toward me. "The industry is changing, John. It's moving toward automation, AI-driven compliance, and lean management structures. We conducted an internal audit of our leadership roles." I didn't open the dossier. I kept my eyes on my son. "David, what is she talking about?" "It's about efficiency, Dad," David said, his voice gaining a little rehearsed strength. "Your salary alone it's significant. And the department you run, safety and compliance, it's heavy, it's manual. We've just signed a contract with a third-party software firm called Logitech. They use an algorithm to manage driver logs, maintenance schedules, and DOT compliance. It's cloud-based, it's instant." "An algorithm?" I laughed, a short, dry sound. "David, an algorithm didn't talk Officer Henderson out of impounding Miller's truck 5 hours ago. I did. An algorithm doesn't know which mechanic drinks on the job and which one stays late to double-check the brake lines. I do." "That's exactly the point," Elena said, her eyes cold. "That personalized style of management isn't scalable. It creates a dependency on a single individual. It's a risk factor. We need a system that functions without human idiosyncrasies." Human idiosyncrasies. I stood up, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "You mean experience. You mean loyalty. I spent 35 years on the road and in this office. I missed your football games, David. I missed your mother's birthday dinners because a driver was stranded in a snowstorm in Dakota. I built this safety rating from the ground up. You think that's a risk factor? It's a legacy cost, Elena said, firing the words like bullets. And it's a cost we are eliminating. We are restructuring the executive team. The position of safety director is being dissolved effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at David, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a cruel joke, or at least to fight for me. I waited for the son I had carried on my shoulders to stand up to his wife and say, "No, this man is the reason we have a company." But David just looked down at his tablet. "It's a forced retirement, Dad," he mumbled. "The severance is generous. Full benefits for 6 months. A lump sum. You can finally relax. Go fishing. You're always saying you're tired." "I never said I was tired," I whispered. "I said I was worried. Worried about you." "Please, John," Elena said, checking her watch. "Let's not make this emotional. It's a business decision. Mike has the paperwork. We need you to sign the NDA and the separation agreement. We need your keys and your badge. Today. Today. It's standard procedure for executive termination." Mike from HR squeaked from the corner. "To protect proprietary data." I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw the arrogance in Elena's posture, the weakness in David's slumped shoulders. They didn't see a father or a founder. They saw an expense line on a spreadsheet. They saw an obstacle to their shiny digital future. A strange calm settled over me. It was the same calm I felt when a tire blew out at 60 miles per hour. Panic kills, focus saves. I realized then that arguing was pointless. They had already made up their minds. They had spent weeks, maybe months, planning this. While I was solving problems at 2 a.m., they were plotting how to cut me out. "Fine," I said. David's head snapped up. "Fine. If you think you don't need me, then you don't need me." I reached for the pen. I didn't read the severance agreement. I didn't care about the money. I signed my name, Jonathan E. Reynolds, with a steady hand. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded like a scream in the quiet room. "Thank you, Dad," David said, looking relieved, as if he had expected me to throw a chair. "You'll see. This is for the best. The company is going to fly." "I'm sure it will," I said. I turned and walked out of the conference room without shaking their hands. I went to my office. The office that still smelled like old paper and coffee, and picked up the cardboard box I had kept under my desk for years. I didn't take the computer. I didn't take the files. I only took the framed photo of Martha, a picture of David and me in front of our first truck, and my lucky stapler. As I stood by the door taking one last look at the room where I had spent half my life, my eyes drifted to the wall behind my desk. Framed in cheap black plastic were 2 documents. The first was the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration Operating Authority. The second was the Certificate of Insurance. On both documents, in the field labeled Qualifying Individual and Safety Director of Record, was my name. I paused. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the regulations better than anyone. I knew that the qualifying individual was the person legally responsible for the fleet's compliance. The law was explicit: if that individual leaves the company, the carrier must notify the DOT and the insurance provider within 30 days. If they don't, the operating authority is revoked. The insurance policy, specifically the gold tier policy that saved us millions, was written explicitly on my personal track record. It wasn't transferable. If I walked out that door without them notifying the authorities, the clock would start ticking. In 30 days, they would be in violation. In 90 days, the insurance renewal would auto-draft and the system would check the employment status of the qualifying individual. I looked at the documents, then I looked down the hall toward the conference room where David and Elena were already popping a bottle of sparkling water, celebrating their restructuring. I should tell them. I should walk back in there and explain Section 390, 5 of the federal regulations. I should tell them that firing me was like pulling the control rod out of a nuclear reactor. It was my duty as a father. I took a step toward the hall. "David," I called out. David poked his head out of the conference room, looking annoyed. "What is it, Dad? We're in the middle of a debrief." "The certificate's on the wall," I said, gesturing with my free hand. "The operating authority. My name is on them. You need to know that—" "Dad, stop." David cut me off, rolling his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes. "We know about the certificates. Elena already contacted Logitech. They're updating the digital files. We don't need the paper on the wall anymore. It's 2024. Stop worrying about the paperwork. We have software to handle your job now." He smiled a condescending, pitying smile. "Go home. Enjoy your retirement. We've got this." He closed the door. I stood there for a moment, the the sound of the latch clicking shut echoing in the hallway. The insult burned, but underneath the burn something else ignited. A cold, hard realization. He hadn't listened. He never listened. He thought updating the digital files was the same as legally replacing the qualifying individual. He thought software could bypass federal law. He was so arrogant, so sure that his new world was superior to my old one, that he couldn't even hear the warning I was trying to give him. I looked at the certificates one last time. My name, my reputation, my shield. I slowly turned my back on them. "Okay, son," I whispered to the empty hallway. "You've got this." I walked to the elevator, pressed the down button, and didn't look back. I walked out of the building that I helped build holding a box of old photos. My son thought he was firing an old man. He didn't realize he was pulling the pin on a grenade. The first morning of my retirement did not begin with a sense of loss as my son had predicted, but with the unfamiliar and beautiful sound of a cardinal singing in the oak tree outside my bedroom window. For 35 years, my mornings had been dictated by the shrill scream of an alarm clock at 4:30 a.m., followed by the immediate cortisol spiking check of the dispatch logs. I would drink scalded coffee while scanning for overnight accidents, breakdowns, or weather delays. But on this Tuesday, the silence in the house was not empty. It was heavy, with a peace I hadn't realized I was starving for. My son David and his wife Elena doubtless imagined me pacing the floorboards of my empty house, staring at the phone, waiting for the humiliation to become too much to bear, so I would call and beg for a consultancy role. They expected a broken man. What they didn't understand was that they hadn't broken me. They had merely unchained me. I spent the morning in the garden, a plot of land that Martha had loved, but I had neglected for a decade. I pulled weeds with a kind of meditative focus, feeling the sun warm the back of my neck. It was physical, honest work, the kind where you can see the progress with your own eyes, unlike the endless corporate shuffling David was now drowning in. But even as I knelt in the dirt, my mind remained sharp. I knew the rhythm of the industry too well to simply switch it off. I knew that right now at the office the morning briefing was ending. I knew that without me there to decipher the nuance of the driver reports, they were likely looking at raw data and missing the human fatigue hiding behind the numbers. And I knew there was one final professional duty I had to perform. It wasn't an act of vengeance, though David would certainly see it that way eventually. It was an act of law. At 11:00 a.m., I went inside, washed the soil from my hands, and went to my study. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It wasn't the company line, it was the direct line to Great Western Insurance, our carrier for the last 20 years. "Great Western, this is Carl," a familiar, raspy voice answered. Carl was a dinosaur like me, a man who had been underwriting risks since the days of paper logs and payphones. "Hello, Carl. It's John Reynolds." "John, I was just looking at your fleet stats this morning. Another clean quarter. You guys are making my job boring, which I appreciate. What can I do for you? Negotiating the renewal early." I took a deep breath. This was the moment. The severance of the lifeline. "No, Carl. I'm calling to formally notify you of a material change in the Reynolds Logistics operating structure. As of yesterday afternoon, I am no longer employed by the company. I have been removed as the safety director and the qualifying individual for the fleet." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the hum of Carl's office, the distant clicking of keyboards. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. It was purely professional, tinged with shock. "You retired just like that. David didn't mention this when I emailed him last week." "It was a sudden restructuring," I said carefully. "I wanted to make sure you were notified personally and for the record. I am formally requesting that my name be removed from the liability policy and the DOT safety certification immediately. I cannot be held liable for operations I am no longer overseeing." "Jesus, John," Carl muttered. "You know what this does, right? You're the key person on the gold policy. The actuarial tables are built around your history. If you're gone, the risk profile changes completely." "I know," I said. "I have to flag this," Carl said, his voice dropping. "Legally, I have to open a review file today. The system will automatically trigger a 90-day grace period. They have 90 days to appoint a new safety director with equivalent experience, minimum 20 years to maintain the current rate. If they don't, or if they replace you with someone unqualified, the policy voids. We'll drop them, John. You know we will. I know the regulations, Carl. That's why I'm calling. Does David know this? Does he know the clock starts ticking the minute I hang up this phone? David has been advised on the importance of the position. I said, choosing my words with the precision of a lawyer. He has chosen to move in a different direction. He believes modern software renders the role obsolete. Carl scoffed a harsh sound. Software doesn't keep drivers awake on I-80 in a blizzard. All right, John. I'll process the notification. I'll send the formal notice of key person change to the corporate office today. Certified mail. Priority. Thanks, Carl. Take care of yourself. You too, John. Enjoy the fishing. And I'm sorry. Don't be, I said, and I meant it. I'm going to be just fine. I hung up the phone. It was done. I hadn't sabotaged the trucks. I hadn't stolen clients. I had simply told the truth to the people who insured the risk. I had removed my shield. Now David was standing in the middle of a battlefield, naked, believing he was wearing armor because his iPad told him so. While I was making a ham sandwich for lunch, I thought about Betty. Betty Miller was the company secretary, a woman of 60, who had been with us since the days when the office was a double-wide trailer in the muddy lot. She was the heart of the place. She remembered every driver's birthday, every mechanic's favorite donut, and she knew where every skeleton was buried in the filing cabinets. David and Elena kept her around only because she accepted a salary far below market rate, a relic of a time when loyalty meant more than a paycheck. I knew exactly what was happening inside those glass walls because I knew Betty. I knew that right now she was likely being humiliated. Back at the office, the atmosphere had shifted from a place of work to a place of posturing. I learned later that day through a discreet text message from a driver exactly how the morning had unfolded. Elena had instituted a new policy: no personal items on desks. She claimed it cluttered the visual flow of the workspace. Betty, whose desk was a shrine to her grandchildren and the company's history, was forced to sweep 30 years of memories into a trash bag while Elena watched sipping an oat milk latte. "We need to project agility, Elizabeth," Elena had told her, refusing to use the name Betty that everyone had used for decades. "This isn't a family room, it's a data center." Betty had bitten her lip and nodded, her hands trembling as she packed away the ceramic cat I had given her for Christmas 10 years ago. She took the abuse because she needed the health insurance for her husband's diabetes medication. She took it because she didn't know where else a 60-year-old woman could find a job in this town. 2 days after my call to Carl, the letter arrived. It came in a bright red envelope from Great Western Insurance stamped, "Urgent Policy Status Change." It landed on Betty's desk at 10:00 a.m. Betty, knowing exactly what a red envelope from the insurer meant, didn't wait for the inter-office mail cart. She understood the gravity of insurance. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and walked straight to the executive conference room where David and Elena were holding their weekly vision board meeting. Through the glass walls, she could see them. David was standing at a whiteboard, drawing complex diagrams with red and blue markers, talking animatedly to a group of bored-looking junior managers. Elena was nodding, typing on her laptop. Betty knocked on the glass door. David ignored her. She knocked again, harder. "Mr. Reynolds, it's urgent." David stopped writing. He turned, his face flushed with annoyance. He marched to the door and yanked it open. "What is it, Betty?" "We are in the middle of discussing the Q3 pivot." "I'm sorry to interrupt, David, Mr. Reynolds," Betty stammered, holding out the red envelope. "This just came via courier from Great Western. It's marked urgent. It looks like a policy notice. I thought you should see it immediately." David looked at the envelope with disdain, as if she were handing him a dirty tissue. He didn't take it. He looked at Elena, then back at Betty. "Betty, what did we discuss about the hierarchy of communication? You don't barge into a strategy session with mail. That's what the inbox is for." "But sir, it's the insurance carrier. If it's a cancellation warning or It's not a cancellation." David snapped, his voice echoing in the open plan office. "We just paid the premium last month. It's probably just another upsell on their cybersecurity package or some compliance spam. I don't have time for paper spam right now. We are trying to revolutionize this company, and you are interrupting me with snail mail." "But put it in the inbox, Betty," David yelled. "Or better yet, file it. I'll look at it when I'm done with the actual work." He slammed the glass door in her face. Betty stood there for a moment, the red envelope shaking in her hand. The entire office was staring at her. The junior managers looked away embarrassed. Elena didn't even look up from her laptop. Betty felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of shame and a sudden cold anger. She had wiped David's nose when he was 6 years old. She had covered for him when he skipped school as a teenager, and now he was treating her like a nuisance. She walked back to her desk. She didn't put the letter in the inbox. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, the deep one where she kept the old archived files that nobody ever looked at. She placed the red envelope inside right at the bottom under a stack of old holiday greeting cards. "File it," she whispered to herself, repeating his command. "All right, David, I'll file it." She closed the drawer. The sound of it sliding shut was the only satisfaction she would get that day. Inside that dark drawer, the letter sat detailing the countdown. 88 days remaining. If a new safety director with 20 years of experience wasn't named by the deadline, the policy would self-terminate. David thought he had silenced an annoying secretary. In reality, he had just silenced the fire alarm. The weeks began to blur into a month. For me, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I was capable of. I fished on Tuesdays. I had lunch with old friends on Thursdays. And on weekends, my grandson Leo would ride his bike over to my house. Leo was 12, a sharp kid with David's eyes but Martha's kindness. He was my spy, though I never asked him to be. He would sit on my back porch eating ice cream and tell me about the tension at home. "Dad is always yelling on the phone," Leo told me one Saturday, kicking his legs against the porch railing. "He says you're being stubborn. He told Mom that the company is making more money than ever now that the dead weight is gone." "Is that so?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Yeah. He bought a new car, a Porsche. But he looks tired, Grandpa. And he fired Mikey." My stomach dropped. "He fired Mikey, the head mechanic." "Yeah, Dad said Mikey was price gouging us. He hired a new company called Budget Fleet. He said they do the same work for 40% less." I looked out at the garden, feeling a physical ache in my chest. Mikey had been with me for 20 years. He was an artist with a diesel engine. He could diagnose a transmission issue by the vibration of the floorboards. Firing Mikey wasn't just a financial decision, it was a safety violation. Budget Fleet was a notorious outfit known for pencil whipping inspections, checking off boxes on a form without ever actually looking at the truck. "That's unfortunate," I said quietly. "Dad had a party about it," Leo continued. "He opened champagne. He said he's going to be on the cover of some business magazine. The false horizon. That's what we used to call it in long-haul trucking. It's when the road looks flat and straight, but it's actually a subtle long decline that burns out your brakes before you realize you're going too fast to stop." David was accelerating down that hill, blinded by the extra cash flow from my salary and the maintenance cuts. He saw the bank account growing and assumed he was a genius. He didn't see the fatigue accumulating in the steel of the chassis. The first crack appeared in the 7th week. I heard about it from a friend at the loading dock. One of our trucks, a 3-year-old Kenworth, had arrived at a distribution center with smoking brakes. The driver, a new hire named Steve, who had barely passed his CDL exam, hadn't noticed the caliper sticking. Under my watch, Mikey would have caught that sticking caliper during the weekly yard check. He would have heard the faint squeal that precedes the failure. But the new Budget Fleet mechanics only came to the yard once a month, and they only looked at what the software told them to look at. The software connected to the truck's sensors only reported critical failures. It didn't report wear and tear. It didn't report almost. The distribution center manager had flagged the truck. It cost the company a 4-hour delay and a tow bill. When David heard about it, he didn't call the mechanics. He blamed the driver. He sent out a company-wide email, which my friend forwarded to me, reminding everyone that driver excellence is our core value and docking the new driver's pay for the tow. He didn't fix the system. He punished the symptom. I sat on my porch that evening, counting the days on the calendar. We were at day 68. The notice of key person change was still sitting in Betty's drawer, collecting dust. The insurance carrier was waiting for a response that was never coming. The mechanics were gone. The drivers were scared and inexperienced, and my son was driving a new Porsche, convinced he had reinvented the wheel. I wanted to call him. The father in me wanted to drive down there, kick open the door, and shake him until his teeth rattled. I wanted to scream, "You are driving off a cliff." But I remembered the look on his face in that conference room, the arrogance, the dismissal. "We have software to handle your job now. If I saved him now, he would never learn. He would think he got away with it. He would think the corners he cut were valid shortcuts. He would continue to put lives at risk, believing his luck was skill. No, he had to feel the impact. He had to hit the wall. I went back to my fishing gear and started untangling a line. It was a knotty mess, complicated and tight, just like the company I had left behind. But unlike the company, I could fix this line with patience. My son was toasting with champagne, celebrating the most profitable month in company history. He didn't hear the sound of the clock ticking in Betty's desk drawer. Only 10 days remained. The silence in my home had become a comfortable companion, but the silence from the company was becoming deafening in a different way. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a hull taking on water deep beneath the surface. I didn't need to be in the office to feel the vibrations of the collapse. I felt it in the visits from the men who used to work for me. They would stop by my porch on their way home, twisting their baseball caps in their hands, looking at their boots, and telling me they were handing in their keys. These were men with 2 million safe miles under their belts, men who could back a 53-foot trailer into a dark alley with inches to spare. They were leaving because the culture of protection I had built was gone, replaced by a culture of quotas. It's the dispatcher's John Toney, a driver who had been with me for 15 years, told me one Tuesday evening. They're just kids, reading scripts. I told the new kid Justin that I was out of hours and needed to shut down in Gary, Indiana. He told me the software said I had a theoretical 45 minutes left and to push through to Chicago. I told him theoretical doesn't keep my eyes open. He threatened to write me up for insubordination. I can't drive for a computer, John. I just can't. I poured Tony a lemonade and listened, my heart aching. When Tony left, replaced by a rookie fresh out of a 3-week driving school, I knew the silent bleeding had begun. It wasn't a hemorrhage of cash, not yet, but a hemorrhage of competence. The institutional knowledge, the thousands of unwritten rules that keep a fleet moving safely, was walking out the door. David saw the payroll going down as he hired cheaper, inexperienced drivers, and he celebrated. He didn't realize that he was trading gold for lead. The first major operational disaster wasn't a crash. It was a paperwork catastrophe that cost more than a new truck. It happened in the dispatch center, the nerve center of the operation that David had proudly modernized. We had landed a lucrative contract hauling industrial solvents, Class 3 flammable liquids. Hazmat loads pay triple, but they come with a minefield of federal regulations. Under my watch, hazmat loads were only assigned to drivers with specific endorsements and 5 years of experience. I personally routed them, checking every tunnel and bridge restriction along the path. But I wasn't there. The new Logitech software treated the hazmat load like a shipment of toilet paper. It assigned the load to a 22-year-old kid named Kevin who had only been driving for 4 months. Kevin didn't know he needed to check his placards every time he stopped. Worse, the software routed him through a restricted tunnel in downtown Baltimore, a tunnel strictly forbidden for flammable materials. The software calculated the fastest route, ignoring the regulatory overlays that hadn't been properly configured during the hasty setup. Kevin was stopped by the Tunnel Authority police before he even made it 50 yards in. The fines were astronomical. The truck was impounded instantly. The load was seized. But the real damage was to the client relationship. The chemical manufacturer called David screaming. They didn't care about his optimization algorithms, and they cared that their hazardous product was sitting in an impound lot because of gross negligence. I heard about it because the client called me first, thinking I was still in charge. "John, what the hell is going on over there?" The logistics manager from the chemical plant shouted into my ear. "I have the Maryland State Police asking me why I entrusted 50 drums of solvent to a company that doesn't know tunnel restrictions." "I don't work there anymore, Frank," I said quietly. "You have to call David. You don't work there since when we signed the contract because of your safety protocols." "I know, Frank, I'm sorry." David managed to keep the contract by offering a massive rebate, essentially hauling the freight for free for 6 months. He hid the loss in the marketing and customer acquisition budget so the investors wouldn't see the operational failure. He told Elena it was just growing pains. But I knew what it was. It was the sound of the foundation cracking. The cracks widened 2 weeks later, and this time it got personal. It was a Thursday afternoon, hot and humid. My phone rang. It was Sam, a driver I had hired straight out of the Army. Sam was loyal, disciplined, and tough, but his voice was trembling. "Boss, I need you," Sam said. He didn't say hello. He sounded like he was on the verge of tears. "I'm here, Sam. What's happening?" "I'm at the scales in Missouri. The DOT officer just pulled me around. He's doing a level 1 inspection. He's under the truck right now." "You have nothing to worry about, Sam," I said instinctively. "You do your pre-trip inspections. Your rig is solid." "No, boss. John, it's not. The brake chamber on the rear drive axle, I wrote it up 3 weeks ago. I put it in the system. The new mechanic, the guys from Budget Fleet, they marked it as deferred. They said it was within tolerance, but the officer just measured the push rod stroke. It's over the limit. He's putting me out of service. They deferred a brake chamber. I felt the blood drain from my face. You don't defer brakes, you fix them or you park the truck. That is the first commandment of trucking. He's writing the citation now, Sam continued, his voice rising in panic. He's talking about a reckless endangerment charge because of the condition of the airlines. John, if I get a reckless on my license, I lose my CDL, I lose my livelihood. I have a baby coming in October. Please. You know this officer. It's Sergeant Miller. He respects you. If you talk to him, tell him we ordered the part. Tell him something. I stood in my kitchen gripping the phone. I could picture Sergeant Miller, a hard man but fair. If I called him, if I used the last scraps of my capital, I might be able to get him to downgrade the violation to a warning or at least keep the reckless charge off Sam's record. I could save Sam. But if I did, I would be saving David. If I fixed this, David would never know how close he came to the edge. He would see the problem vanish and assume his Budget Fleet strategy was working. He would continue to defer maintenance. He would continue to put drivers like Sam in unsafe vehicles. Next time it wouldn't be a scale house. It would be a minivan full of kids on a downhill grade. I closed my eyes. The pain of what I had to do was sharper than any physical wound. Sam, I said, my voice steady but hollow. I can't make the call. What, John, please? It's me, it's Sam. I am not the safety director anymore, I said, forcing the words out. I have no authority. If I call Sergeant Miller, I am interfering with an official investigation. I can't do it. John, they're going to tow the truck. They're going to suspend me. Call David, I said. Call the office. This is their mess. They have to answer for it. I called David, Sam screamed. I called him 3 times. He's not answering. His voicemail says he's in a client retention lunch. I knew exactly where that lunch was. It was at the country club. It was Thursday. David was playing golf. He was probably on the 9th hole, laughing oblivious to the fact that his driver was standing on the side of a highway in Missouri, watching his career evaporate because of a $10 brake part. I'm sorry, Sam, I whispered. I truly am, but you have to let them tow it. I thought you had my back, Sam said. The line went dead. I put the phone down and stared at the wall for an hour. I felt like a traitor. I felt dirty. But I knew that for the fever to break, the patient has to sweat. David had to see the tow bill. He had to see the out-of-service order. He had to explain to the investors why his assets were being seized by the state police. The fallout from Sam's impoundment was immediate and chaotic. The fine was $5,000. The tow was another $2,000. But the real cost was the safety score. Our score, which had been pristine for decades, took a massive hit. This triggered an automatic audit warning from the DOT. David didn't learn the lesson. He didn't fire Budget Fleet. He didn't apologize to Sam. Instead, panic set in. The savings he had bragged about were evaporating in fines. He needed to stop the bleeding, but instead of applying a tourniquet, he decided to drain the blood from somewhere else. It was Betty who alerted me to the final descent. She called me on a burner phone she had bought with cash. She sounded terrified, whispering as if she were hiding in a closet. John, you need to know what they are doing, she said. David and Elena, they just had a meeting with the manager of Budget Fleet. What happened, Betty? They were screaming about the out-of-service rates. Elena said we can't afford any more red tags. She said the trucks have to stay on the road to make up the revenue. She told the mechanics, oh God, John, tell me. She told them to streamline the annual vehicle inspections. She told them to generate the reports without bringing the trucks into the shop. She called it administrative compliance. She wants them to pencil whip the entire fleet, John. 80 trucks. She wants green lights on paper for trucks that haven't been looked at in 3 months. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Pencil whipping. An annual vehicle inspection wasn't just a regulatory violation. It was fraud. It was a felony. It meant declaring a vehicle safe when you had no idea if the brakes worked, if the tires were bald, or if the steering linkage was about to snap. It was a conscious decision to value profit over human life. Did David agree to this? I asked. He hesitated, Betty said, but then he looked at the quarterly projection. He nodded. He signed the work order, John. He authorized it. Okay, Betty, I said, my voice turning hard. You need to be careful. Do not sign anything. Do not put your initials on any of those reports. Just do your filing and keep your head down. I'm scared, John. I feel like I'm working on the Titanic. Get to the lifeboats, Betty. It's almost time. I hung up and walked over to the calendar on my kitchen wall. I looked at the date. It was September 14th. I counted back. My resignation date was June 12th. June, July, August, September, 92 days. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The grace period from Great Western Insurance was 90 days. It was a hard stop. At midnight 2 days ago, the gold tier liability policy, the policy that required a qualified safety director with 20 years of experience, had expired. Because David had ignored Betty's red envelope. Because David had refused to hire a replacement. Because David had assumed the insurance was just another bill on autopay. The policy was void. Carl at the insurance agency hadn't called to warn them because the system is automated. The notice had been sent. The deadline had passed. The coverage had lapsed. I looked out the window at the street, imagining my old fleet rolling down the highways of America. I imagined the trucks carrying steel coils, lumber, and hazardous chemicals. Right now, at this very second, Reynolds Logistics was a ghost fleet. David thought he was saving money by faking inspections. He didn't realize that the piece of paper he was saving money on, the insurance certificate, was already worthless. He was operating a multi-million-dollar fleet with zero liability coverage. If a truck scratched a Honda Civic in a parking lot, the company would be on the hook for the paint job. But if a truck killed someone, it wouldn't just be bankruptcy. It would be prison. He had removed the shield. He had ignored the warning. And now he had ordered his soldiers to march into a minefield blindfolded. I sat down at my table, the weight of the tragedy pressing on my shoulders. I wasn't angry anymore. I was horrified. I had wanted him to learn a lesson, but I hadn't wanted this. This was no longer a business failure. This was a moral abyss. They were driving 80,000-pound trucks on public roads with falsified papers and no insurance. They thought they were just bending the rules. They were actually courting a catastrophe. The catastrophe I had dreaded did not arrive with a whisper. It arrived with the screaming sirens of a breaking news alert on the 6 o'clock news. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the hidden expiration of the insurance policy, and the sky outside my window was a bruised purple heavy with the threat of an autumn storm. I was sitting in my armchair, a book open on my lap that I hadn't read a single page of, when the local broadcast cut away from a commercial for car dealerships to a live feed from a helicopter. The camera panned over a scene of devastation that made my stomach turn to ice. It was Interstate 24, specifically the westbound descent of Monteagle Mountain, a stretch of asphalt known among truckers as one of the most unforgiving grades in the country. A 6% grade over 4 miles requires respect, experience, and above all, perfect brakes. On the screen, smoke billowed from a twisted heap of metal that was unrecognizable as a vehicle lying on its side in a ravine just off the runaway truck ramp. The trailer had split open like a ripe melon, spilling hundreds of gallons of blue industrial liquid into the creek bed below. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Major hazmat spill on I-24. Traffic halted. Environmental hazard declared." Then the camera zoomed in. Through the smoke and the chaos of emergency lights, I saw the logo on the door of the crushed cab. It was mangled, scorched, and covered in soot, but I knew the shape of those letters better than I knew the lines on my own hand. Reynolds Logistics. I stood up, the book falling to the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that truck. Unit 402. It was a 5-year-old Peterbilt, a workhorse that had been reliable for 500,000 miles. But I also knew that Unit 402 had been due for a brake shoe replacement and a slack adjuster calibration 3 weeks ago, maintenance that fell under the new budget fleet regime. I stared at the screen, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please let the driver be alive. Please don't let it be a kid. The reporter's voice cut through my prayer. Authorities confirmed the driver, a 23-year-old male with less than 6 months of experience, has been airlifted to Vanderbilt Medical Center in critical condition. Preliminary reports suggest total brake failure on the descent. The Tennessee Highway Patrol is already calling this one of the worst environmental disasters in the county's history due to the chemical runoff entering the watershed. I sank back into the chair, covering my face with my hands. It had happened. The abstract fear, the what-if scenarios I had used to argue with David for years, had manifested into blood and oil on a Tennessee mountainside. A young man was fighting for his life because my son wanted to save 15% on maintenance costs. A river was being poisoned because Elena wanted to streamline inspections. The guilt washed over me, irrational but suffocating. I had built the company that did this. I had put my name on the door. Even though I had been forced out, even though I had warned them, I felt the weight of that crushed metal pressing on my chest. I expected my phone to ring. I expected David to call weeping, asking for help, asking what to do. But the phone remained silent. Inside the glass walls of the corporate office, however, there was no silence. I learned later, through a terrified and hushed phone call from Betty the next morning, exactly what transpired in the executive suite while the wreckage was still smoking. It was like watching a demon possess him, John. Betty whispered, her voice trembling so hard I could barely understand her. When the news broke, David didn't ask about the driver. He didn't ask about the family. He ran to his office and started shredding papers. He was screaming about the stock price. He was screaming about the brand image. Did he call the insurance? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He did, Betty said. I was listening from the hallway. He had it on speaker. He was shouting at Carl from Great Western. He told Carl to get a hazmat cleanup crew out there immediately and to prepare a press release stating that we were fully covered. And what did Carl say? I've never heard a grown man sound so cold, John. Carl told him, David, you don't have a cleanup crew coming. You don't have coverage. Your policy voided 48 hours ago because you failed to replace the qualifying individual. I sent the notice to your office 90 days ago. You are operating uninsured. You are personally liable for every drop of chemical in that water and every bone broken in that driver's body. What did David do? He dropped the phone, Betty said. He just collapsed into his chair. He turned white. Elena was there. She wasn't crying, she was pacing. She looked like a trapped animal. She kept saying, we can't lose everything. We can't go to jail. There has to be a way out. There is no way out of this, Betty, I said. Operating without insurance on a commercial scale, that's mandatory prison time. The EPA fines alone will bankrupt them by morning. That's what I thought, Betty said, and then her voice dropped to a barely audible register. But then they got quiet. Elena stopped pacing. She looked at David, and she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, it's not our fault if the records show we were sabotaged. It's not our fault if the money for the repairs was stolen before we even took over. What does that mean, Betty? I don't know, John, but they kicked me out of the office and locked the door. They've been in there all night with the new IT guy. They're doing something to the server. I'm scared. Go home, Betty, I told her. Leave now. Don't look back. I spent the rest of that day in a daze. I tried to do normal things to anchor myself. I went to the grocery store. I mowed the lawn. I started making a pot of chili for dinner, chopping onions with mechanical precision, trying to cry from the fumes rather than the grief. I kept the television off. I didn't want to see the wreckage again. I didn't want to see the Reynolds Logistics logo being dragged out of the ravine like a corpse. The sun went down, casting long, menacing shadows across my kitchen floor. The chili simmered on the stove, the smell of cumin and chili powder filling the house, a scent that used to mean comfort, family, and football games on Sunday. Now it just smelled like waiting. At 7:15 p.m., the waiting ended. I didn't hear a car pull up. I saw the lights first. Blue and red strobe lights, aggressive and piercing, flashing against my dining room window, illuminating the oak trees in chaotic bursts of color. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door. I opened it to find 3 men standing on my porch. 2 were uniformed police officers, their hands resting near their holsters, their faces grim. The 3rd man was in a cheap gray suit holding a leather portfolio. I recognized the look in his eyes immediately. He wasn't a cop. He was a forensic auditor or a fraud investigator. He had the hungry look of a man who hunted money. Jonathan Reynolds, the man in the suit asked. He didn't offer a handshake. That's me, I said, keeping my voice level. Is this about the accident on Monteagle? I saw it on the news. It's a tragedy. We're not here to discuss the traffic accident, Mr. Reynolds, the man said, stepping forward, forcing me to take a step back into my foyer. My name is Detective Hargrove with the Financial Crimes Division. These officers are here to execute a search warrant for your residence and personal electronics. A search warrant? I blinked, the absurdity of the words hitting me like a slap. For what? I haven't worked at the company for 3 months. We are investigating a complaint of grand larceny, embezzlement, and corporate sabotage filed by the CEO of Reynolds Logistics, Hargrove said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket and thrusting it toward me. The allegations are severe, Mr. Reynolds. We're talking about the systematic diversion of maintenance funds into personal accounts over a period of 5 years. Your son, David Reynolds, alleges that the brake failure on Unit 402 was the direct result of a long-term scheme where you pocketed the repair budget and falsified the logs to cover your tracks. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The hallway stretched and warped. I stared at the detective, trying to process the sheer venomous magnitude of the lie. David wasn't just trying to blame me for a mistake. He was accusing me of stealing the very money I had begged him to spend. He was accusing me of the exact crime he was guilty of. My son said that. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He provided us with preliminary digital evidence, Hargrove said, his tone dripping with skepticism. Spreadsheets, bank transfer requests with your digital signature. It paints a pretty clear picture, Mr. Reynolds. It looks like you were draining the company dry, leaving the fleet to rot, and then you bailed out right before the whole thing collapsed. I looked past the detective to the driveway. I imagined David sitting in his glass office, sweating, with Elena whispering in his ear. I imagined them crafting this narrative. Blame the old man. He's retired. He's got savings. He can take the fall. If we say he stole the maintenance money, then we aren't negligent, we're victims. The insurance might even pay out if it's a crime scene. It was evil, pure distilled evil, born of desperation. He was willing to send his father to prison to save his reputation. He was willing to let me die in a cell so he could keep his Porsche. A surge of rage rose in my chest, hot and blinding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the detective out. I wanted to drive to the office and burn it to the ground. But then I remembered the box. I remembered the safe in the garage. I remembered the maintenance diaries I had kept by hand since 1989. I remembered the carbon copies of every work order, every invoice, every refusal of service that David had signed in the last 90 days. The rage cooled instantly, crystallizing into something sharper than anger. It hardened into resolve. I looked at Detective Hargrove. I saw a man doing his job, a man who had been fed a convincing story by a panicked executive with a good printer. I took a deep breath, smelling the chili simmering on the stove behind me. Detective, I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. I understand you have a job to do. You have a warrant. You can search my house. You can take my computer. You can take my phone. Hargrove looked surprised by my cooperation. He had expected a fight. He had expected a denial. However, I continued, stepping back and opening the door wider, inviting the wolves into my sanctuary. Before you start tearing through my drawers, I would like to offer you a cup of coffee. And while you drink it, I have one question for you. We don't need coffee, Mr. Reynolds, Hargrove said, stepping into the hallway. What is the question? I looked him dead in the eye. I channeled 35 years of staring down union bosses, federal regulators, and angry mechanics. I stood tall, the spine of the company, the ghost in the machine. You said my son showed you digital evidence, I said softly. Spreadsheets, computer logs, things that can be edited, things that can be backdated by an IT department in a panic. Hargrove frowned. Digital forensics will determine the authenticity, but did they show you the real logs? I interrupted him. The real logs. The paper, I said. The handwritten, grease-stained carbon copy daily maintenance journals that I kept for 35 years. The ones where every mechanic signed their name in ink. The ones that prove that on the day I walked out of that building, Unit 402 was in perfect condition, and the ones that prove that for the last 90 days, every single request for brake repairs was denied by a user ID belonging to David Reynolds. The detective stopped. The officers behind him exchanged a glance. You have paper records, Hargrove asked, his skepticism wavering just a fraction. I'm old-school detective, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I don't trust the cloud. I trust ink, and I have 35 years of it sitting in a fireproof safe in my garage. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, not looking back to see if they were following. I knew they were. Come on in, I said. The chili is ready, and I think you're going to find that the story my son told you has a few holes in it. My son didn't just want to take my job. To save his own skin, he was willing to take my freedom. But he forgot one thing: I never threw anything away. The walk from my kitchen to the garage felt like the longest commute of my life, though it was only 20 feet. The linoleum of the hallway gave way to the cold concrete of the garage floor, a transition that marked the boundary between my domestic peace and the industrial war my son had brought to my doorstep. Detective Hargrove and the two uniformed officers followed me, their footsteps heavy and echoing in the enclosed space. The garage was my sanctuary, a place that smelled of sawdust oil and the sharp tang of potting soil. To them, it was a potential crime scene, a place where an embezzler might hide his ill-gotten gains. To me, it was the archive of a lifetime of honest labor. I walked past the lawnmower and the shelves of fishing tackle to the far wall where a heavy fireproof gun safe sat bolted to the concrete. It was an old model solid steel painted a dull olive green. I didn't keep guns in it. I kept something far more dangerous to the men who were trying to destroy me, the truth. "He told you I stole the maintenance fund," I said, my voice echoing slightly off the metal garage door. I didn't turn around to look at them. I focused on the dial of the safe. "He told you I authorized payments to shell companies and let the trucks rot. He probably showed you Excel spreadsheets with my digital signature pasted onto them. Is that right, Detective?" "The allegations involve a sophisticated diversion of assets, yes," Hargrove said, his voice cautious but firm. "The digital audit trail provided by your son's IT team is comprehensive, Mr. Reynolds. It shows transfers starting 5 years ago." I spun the dial. Right to 32, left to 18, right to 07. The tumblers clicked into place with a sound that felt like a gavel striking a block. "Digital trails can be rewritten," I said, pulling the heavy steel handle down. "You can tell a computer that today is yesterday. You can tell a spreadsheet that a number is a different number, but you can't lie to ink." I swung the heavy door open. Inside there were no stacks of cash, no hidden jewelry, no passports for a flight to a non-extradition country. There were only rows of black-bound ledger books. There were 35 of them, one for every year I had run the fleet. They were organized chronologically, their spines cracked from use, their pages yellowing with age. I reached in and pulled out the volume labeled 2024. I turned around and dropped it onto the workbench with a heavy thud. "This is the maintenance diary for the current fiscal year," I said, placing my hand on the cover. "Every single morning for 35 years I walked the yard. I spoke to the head mechanic. I personally inspected the work orders, and then I wrote them down here, by hand, in pen." Hargrove stepped forward, his curiosity finally overriding his suspicion. He reached out and opened the book. The pages were filled with my handwriting, a cramped, practical script, but more importantly, taped to each page were the carbon copies of the actual parts invoices from the suppliers, signed not just by me, but by the mechanics, the drivers, and the vendors. "Turn to June 12th, I said. "That was my last day." Hargrove flipped through the pages. He found the entry. "Read it," I commanded. "Unit 402. Hargrove read aloud, his brow furrowing. "Annual inspection completed. Brake linings replaced on drive axles 2 and 3. Slack adjusters calibrated. Tire tread depth 12 to 30 seconds. Signed, Michael Kowalski, head mechanic." "Mikey," I said, a lump forming in my throat at the mention of my old friend. "Mikey signed that. He inspected that truck the morning I was fired. Now, Detective, look at the invoice stapled right next to it. Look at the date." Hargrove looked. "June 11th. Napa Auto Parts. Heavy-duty brake kit. Paid in full." "Paid in full," I repeated. "Now, did my son show you a digital log that said Unit 402 had deferred maintenance? Did he show you a spreadsheet that said the money for those brakes was transferred to a consulting firm that I supposedly own?" Hargrove didn't answer. He was flipping forward in the book. He turned past June 12th. The pages were blank. "The book ends when I left," I said. "Because I didn't steal the money, Detective. I left the fleet in perfect condition. If there is money missing from the maintenance account, it didn't disappear 5 years ago. It disappeared starting June 13th, the day my son decided to fire the mechanics and pocket the difference." Hargrove looked up from the book. The suspicion in his eyes was fading, replaced by the calculating look of a man realizing he had been played. "If this is authentic, if these signatures are real, then the digital records provided to us were fabricated." "They were backdated," I said. He panicked. The accident happened, he realized he had no insurance, and he needed a scapegoat. He needed to make it look like the trucks were already broken when I left. But he forgot that I kept the receipts. "You mentioned insurance," Hargrove said, closing the book but keeping his hand on it, treating it now as evidence for me, not against me. David Reynolds claims you allowed the policy to lapse due to negligence before you resigned. I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. I didn't allow anything to lapse. I was the key person. When they fired me, the policy had a clause. It required notification. I reached back into the safe and pulled out a small green card. It was a domestic return receipt from the United States Postal Service. "This is the certified mail receipt," I said, handing it to him. "Dated June 14th, addressed to Great Western Insurance, signed for by their underwriting department. This proves I notified the carrier that I was no longer the safety director. I did my legal duty. I triggered the 90-day grace period to give my son time to hire a replacement. He had 3 months detective. He didn't hire anyone. He ignored the warnings. He let the clock run out because he was too arrogant to believe the rules applied to him." Hargrove studied the small green card. He looked at the date. He looked at the signature. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of it. Then he looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of respect and pity. "He tried to pin the lapsed policy on you," Hargrove muttered. "He told us you hid the renewal notices." "I didn't hide anything," I said. "I just stopped doing his homework for him." Just then the detective's phone chimed. It wasn't a text. It was a priority alert from his precinct. He pulled it out, annoyed at the interruption, but as he read the screen, his eyes went wide. He looked from the phone to me and then back to the phone. "Mr. Reynolds," Hargrove said slowly, "we just received an anonymous submission through our corporate fraud tip line. It's a digital file, an internal memo from Reynolds Logistics." "Let me guess," I said, feeling the presence of Betty in the room, her quiet courage finally breaking the surface. "It's dated recently. Dated 3 days ago." Hargrove read, scrolling through the document on his screen. "Subject Maintenance Cost Reduction Strategy from Elena Reynolds to Budget Fleet Services. Text, effective immediately, all annual vehicle inspections are to be processed administratively. Physical inspection of assets is suspended until Q4 revenue targets are met. Generate passing reports for all units currently in service." The garage went silent. The officers by the door shifted their weight. The air in the room changed instantly. The investigation had just turned 180 degrees. This wasn't a case of embezzlement by a disgruntled former employee. This was a case of conspiracy insurance fraud and reckless endangerment by the sitting executives. Generate passing reports. Hargrove repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "That's the smoking gun. If they ordered the reports to be faked, and then a truck crashed because of brake failure, then it's not an accident," I finished for him. "It's a crime scene." Hargrove looked at me. "Do you know who sent this?" "I have no idea. I lied protecting Betty until the very end. But I imagine there are still a few honest people left in that building who don't want to go to prison for my son's vanity." Hargrove nodded. He signaled to the uniformed officers. "Secure these logbooks, all of them. Tag them as primary evidence. I want a chain of custody started immediately. Mr. Reynolds, I'm going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement, but for tonight, you're not a suspect. You're our star witness." "What are you going to do now?" I asked. Hargrove buttoned his jacket. His face was hard, the face of a hunter who had found the true scent. "Now we're going to pay a visit to the executive suite of Reynolds Logistics. If they're fabricating evidence to frame an innocent man to cover up a fatality, they aren't going home tonight." They left as quickly as they had arrived. The blue lights flashed one last time against the trees, and then faded into the distance, heading toward the city, heading toward the glass building where my son was likely pacing the floor, waiting for the call that would tell him his father was in handcuffs. I went back inside the house. I turned off the stove. I wasn't hungry. I sat in the dark kitchen listening to the silence, but the silence didn't last long. Within an hour, the avalanche started. I watched it unfold on the late-night news and through the barrage of texts from old friends in the industry. The police raid on the headquarters was swift. The DOT issued an emergency revocation order, grounding the entire fleet nationwide. Every truck with the name Reynolds on the side was ordered to park immediately. The bank alerted to the fraud investigation, and the voided insurance froze the corporate accounts. The empire I had built brick by brick was dismantled in the span of 2 hours. Then, at 11:45 p.m., my phone rang. It wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't the police. The caller ID simply said, "David." I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew there was nothing left to say. But he was my son. Even after everything, the instinct to answer when he called was a reflex I couldn't sever. I picked up the phone. "Dad." His voice was unrecognizable. It was high, thin, and broken by ragged sobs. It sounded like the voice of the 6-year-old boy who had scraped his knee, not the 30-year-old CEO who had tried to frame me. "I'm here, David." "They're here, Dad," he cried, his breath hitching. "The police. They're putting Elena in a car. They're seizing everything. They have the computers. They said you gave them the books. Why did you give them the books?" "Because you tried to send me to prison, David," I said calmly. "You tried to say I stole from you." "I was scared," he screamed, a sound of pure terror. "It was Elena's idea. She said it was the only way. The market. The margins were too tight. We just needed a little more time. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. You have to tell them, Dad. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You know the guys at the DOT. You know the DA. Call them. Please, tell them I'm a good kid. Tell them I didn't mean it." I listened to him beg. I listened to him blame his wife, blame the economy, blame the software. I listened for a single ounce of responsibility, a single admission that he had been wrong to discard the values I taught him. But there was nothing, just fear and entitlement. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted the safety director to make the bad violation go away. "I can't do that, David," I said. "Why not?" he sobbed. "You're my father. You're supposed to protect me." "I did protect you," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I protected you for 35 years. I built a shield around you so strong you thought you were invincible, but you threw the shield away because you thought it was heavy. You wanted to be the boss, David. This is what it means to be the boss. You own the wins and you own the losses. Dad, please, they're coming for me now. They're walking into my office. You broke the trucks," I said, tears finally spilling down my own cheeks in the dark kitchen. "You broke the law, and you broke this family. I can't fix any of that for you." "Dad, don't hang up. You have to make a call. Call the governor. Call someone. He asked me to make a call to use my old connections to save him. I told him I had already made the only call that mattered to the truth." I pressed the red button. The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, the phone clutched in my hand, mourning the son I had lost long before the police arrived. The silence returned to the house, but this time it was the silence of a final, irrevocable ending. The winter that followed the collapse of Reynolds Logistics was one of the coldest in Tennessee history, a fitting backdrop for the dismantling of an empire that had taken 35 years to build and only 90 days to destroy. I watched the seasons change from the window of my kitchen, the same window where I had watched the police lights flash, but now the view was different. The driveway was empty of squad cars. The silence of the house had transformed from a void into a sanctuary, and the phone no longer rang with accusations. It rang with offers, but before I could move forward, I had to witness the final act of the tragedy my son had written for himself. The liquidation of a company is a noisy, ugly business, a public autopsy of failure where vultures circle to pick the bones clean. 6 months after the raid, the court-ordered auction took place at the old brickyard where I had started the business. I went not to gloat, but to bear witness. The morning air was crisp, smelling of thawing mud and diesel. A crowd of buyers had gathered, competitors, scrap dealers, and bargain hunters, all looking to profit from David's arrogance. I stood at the back of the crowd, pulling my coat collar up against the wind. I saw the assets being paraded out. The office furniture, the sleek, ergonomic chairs David had spent thousands on, sold for pennies on the dollar. The server racks that housed the Logitech software the digital god David had worshipped were sold as electronic scrap. David was there too, but he wasn't standing on the podium. He was standing near the gate, watching his inheritance be hammered away lot by lot. He looked 10 years older than he had in that conference room. He had lost weight, his suit fit poorly, and the arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. The legal avalanche had been merciless. The insurance company had sued him personally for fraud, piercing the corporate veil because of the fabricated documents. To stay out of federal prison, he had liquidated everything. The custom-built house in the gated community was gone. The Porsche was gone. His personal savings were drained to pay restitution to the driver who was injured on Montiego Mountain. That young man, thank God, had survived and was learning to walk again, his medical bills paid for by the ruins of my son's fortune. Elena was nowhere to be seen. That marriage, built on the shaky foundation of ambition and status, had crumbled the moment the bank accounts were frozen. Betty had told me that Elena filed for divorce 3 days after the raid, citing irreconcilable differences, though everyone knew the difference was that David was no longer a CEO with a future. She had moved back to the city, leaving David to face the music alone. It was a harsh lesson, but in my darker moments, I felt it was the only way he would ever learn the difference between value and price. "Mr. Reynolds." I turned to see a familiar face beaming at me from the edge of the crowd. It was Betty. But this wasn't the terrified woman who had whispered to me on a burner phone. This was a woman standing tall, wearing a sharp new coat and holding a clipboard. "Hello, Betty," I said, smiling for the first time that day. "You look expensive." She laughed a bright, genuine sound. "I got a promotion, John. Or rather, I got recognized. The company that bought the majority of the fleet, Blue Ridge Transport, their CEO, sat down with me during the due diligence phase. He asked me how the filing system worked. After 10 minutes, he realized I was the only person who actually knew where anything was. He hired me on the spot as their new regional office manager. Full benefits. And a raise." "I'm glad to hear that, Betty. You deserve it." "They asked about you too," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The owner of Blue Ridge, Mr. Henderson. He knows who you are. He knows you're the one who kept the safety rating platinum for 3 decades. He asked if I thought you'd take a meeting." I looked out at the auction yard where a forklift was moving a pallet of spare parts that David had tried to claim I stole. "I'm not looking for a job, Betty. I'm retired. I'm gardening." "He doesn't want you to punch a clock, John," Betty said, touching my arm gently. "He wants you to be a senior advisor. He said he needs someone to teach his young executives that trucking isn't a video game. He said he needs a conscience." I thought about that word, conscience. It was the one asset David had failed to value. 2 weeks later, I walked into the headquarters of Blue Ridge Transport. It was different from the glass and steel mausoleum David had built. This office smelled of coffee and hard work. The furniture was sturdy oak, worn in places. The CEO, Mike Henderson, met me at the door. He was a man my age with grease under his fingernails and a handshake that could crush a walnut. "John Reynolds," he said, "the legend. I heard you took down a fraud ring from your kitchen table with nothing but a notepad and a spicy pot of chili." "I just kept my receipts, Mike," I said. We sat in his office for an hour. He didn't ask me about software or synergies. He asked me about driver retention. He asked me about winter driving protocols in the Rockies. He asked me how I handled the morale of mechanics during the holidays. At the end of the hour, he slid a contract across the desk. "I want you to come on board as senior safety advisor," Mike said. 10 hours a week. You choose the days. You work from home if you want, or you come in and yell at my managers when they get stupid. I'll pay you double what your son was paying you, and I'll give you full autonomy. I don't need a worker, John. I need a standard bearer." I looked at the contract. It was a vindication. It was proof that the world hadn't moved on from the values I stood for. Only my son had. I picked up the pen, a heavy metal pen, not a stylus, and signed my name. "One condition," I said. "Name it." At the auction last week, there was one truck that didn't sell, Unit 001, a 1990 Kenworth. It was the first truck I ever bought. My son listed it as scrap because the engine needs an overhaul. "I bought that lot," Mike said. "It's sitting in our overflow yard. You want it?" "I want to buy it from you," I said. "I want to restore it. My own time, my own dime." Mike smiled. "Consider it a signing bonus. It's yours, John. Get her running again." The restoration of Unit 001 took me 3 months. It became my therapy. I spent my days in the garage not fighting legal battles but fighting rust and seized bolts. I stripped the engine down to the block, replacing gaskets and pistons. I polished the chrome until it shone like a mirror. I reupholstered the cracked leather seats. It was hard physical labor, and I loved every second of it. It was a reclaiming of my history. David had tried to erase this truck to turn it into a tax write-off, but under the grime, the steel was still strong. It just needed care. It just needed someone who knew its worth. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it the dogwood blossoms and the greening of the hills, my life had settled into a new, victorious rhythm. I was working 2 days a week for Blue Ridge, mentoring a new generation of safety directors who listened to me with wide-eyed respect. My bank account was healthy, replenished by the consulting fees and the satisfaction of honest work. But the true victory wasn't the money, and it wasn't the job. It was Saturday morning. The sun was bright, and the air was filled with the smell of fresh-cut grass. I was in the driveway, wiping down the fender of the fully restored Kenworth. The blue paint gleamed in the sunlight, the chrome stacks towering toward the sky. The engine was idling a deep rhythmic thrum that resonated in my chest like a second heartbeat. A beat-up Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. It was David's car. He had moved into a small apartment complex across town, working as a dispatcher for a courier service, the only job he could get in the industry with his ruined reputation. He looked tired. His hair was graying at the temples, and he wore a simple polo shirt, not the $1,000 suits of his past. The passenger door opened, and Leo jumped out. My grandson had grown 2 inches in the last 6 months. He was carrying a backpack and wearing a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Grandpa," Leo shouted, running toward me. "Is that it? Is that the truck?" "That's her, Leo," I said, catching him in a hug. "Unit 001, ready for the road." David got out of the car slowly. He stood by the hood of his Civic, looking at the massive truck and then looking at me. There was no anger in his eyes anymore. There was no arrogance. There was only a profound, quiet shame. He looked at the house he had grown up in, the garage where he had once played, and the father he had tried to destroy. "She looks good, Dad," David said, his voice soft. I didn't think she'd run again. I thought the block was cracked." "The block was fine," I said, looking him in the eye. "It just needed to be cleaned. You gave up on it too soon. You saw a little rust and thought it was garbage." David flinched, the double meaning landing squarely. He looked down at his shoes. "Yeah, I guess I did that a lot." "Leo is staying for dinner," I said. It wasn't an invitation for David to stay. We weren't there yet. Maybe we never would be. Forgiveness is a road, not a destination, and we were still at the on-ramp. "Pick him up at 7. "Okay," David said. He hesitated, then looked at the truck again. "I'm glad you're doing well, Dad. Really, I heard about the Blue Ridge deal. They're lucky to have you." "I know," I said. David got back in his car and drove away. I watched him go, feeling a pang of sadness, but mostly a sense of necessary closure. He was rebuilding his life from the bottom just as I had built mine 40 years ago. It was the best thing that could have happened to him. "Grandpa, can we go inside?" Leo asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Can I sit in the driver's seat?" "You sure can," I said. I opened the heavy door and helped Leo climb up into the cab. The smell of new leather and old diesel filled the space. Leo sat behind the massive steering wheel, his feet dangling far above the pedals. He gripped the wheel with both hands, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's huge," Leo whispered. "How do you see anything?" "That's the most important part," I said, climbing up onto the running board to stand beside him. I reached in and adjusted the side mirror. "You don't just look forward, Leo. You have to check your mirrors. You have to know what's behind you, what's coming up on your blind spot, and what you're leaving behind." "Like checking for police?" Leo asked innocently. "Like checking for everything," I said, pointing at the reflection. In the mirror, I could see the empty driveway where David had just left. I could see the garden where I had found peace. And I could see my own face, lined and weathered, but smiling. "You respect the machine," I told him, placing my hand over his on the wheel. "You respect the road. And you never, ever let someone tell you that the new way is the only way. Sometimes the old way is the only thing keeping you on the road." Leo looked up at me, absorbing the lesson, sensing the weight of the moment, even if he didn't fully understand the history behind it. He honked the air horn, a loud, joyous blast that echoed through the neighborhood, announcing to the world that we were still here, still loud and still moving. I looked out over the hood of the truck, past the trees toward the horizon. I had lost a company, but I had saved my dignity. I had lost a son to greed, but I was getting him back slowly through humility. And I had kept the one thing they tried to take from me, my name. They thought my age made me weak. They forgot that steel only gets harder when you put it through the fire. I didn't just survive their betrayal, I outlived it. John's journey proves that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to simply stand back and let the truth do the heavy lifting. We have all faced moments where we were underestimated or cast aside, and this story is a reminder that dignity and experience are currencies that never lose their value. I want to hear your take on John's final decision because it is one that divides people. Do you think he was right to let his son face the full legal consequences alone, or should a parent always step in to save their child no matter the cost? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as I would love to read your perspective on this kind of tough love. If you believe in the power of resilience and want to hear more stories about justice being served and legacies being reclaimed, please make sure to click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter.